Satoshi Kon's 1997 directorial debut film, Perfect Blue, is difficult to watch and might even be more difficult to talk about. The film's contents and its characters are not only uncomfortable to discuss because of its highly graphic scenes and the unsettling direction the narrative takes, but because describing what is happening in the film presents a language problem, particularly a problem of plurals. Perfect Blue is an exercise in multiplicity, bursting at the seams with mimas, match cuts, and more. The film seems to resist disassembly and insistently relocates the whole back into any single part you try to isolate. For example, to talk about Mima, you must clarify her and contextualize her vis-a-vis all the Mimas. So before we can proceed any further, we must lay out how this video essay understands the overarching story of Perfect Blue. Framed as a psychological thriller, the film is based on Yoshikazu Takoichi's 1991 novel Perfect Blue Kansen Hentai. The film follows Mimarin Kirigoe, who goes by stage name Mima, a pop idol leaving the industry to become an actress. From this point on, Mimarin will be referred to by said stage name Mima. Mima's producer, Tarokoro, books her a job working on popular mystery show Double Bind, written by renowned screenwriter Takao Shibuya. While on the show, Mima is asked to do promiscuous scenes that drastically differ from her pure pop idol image. This increasingly worries her manager, ex-pop idol Rumi Hidaka. As Mima's new career continues, she receives threatening letters and stumbles upon a blog impersonating her, all while a series of murders take out several of the people working closely to create her new image. Increasingly, Mima is visited by a hallucination of the quote-unquote real Mima, or alternate Mima, a glowing, pristine, and pure version of Mima that embodies what she could have been if she had stayed an idol. As tensions elevate, Rumi reveals to Mima that she's actually been the mastermind behind everything: the murders, letters, blog, and stalker Uchida. In a wonderfully terrifying sequence, Mima is chased by Rumi dressed as alternate Mima through the streets of the city. The chase ends when Rumi stabs herself after briefly snapping out of her alter ego persona. As she stumbles into the road, Mima knocks them both out of the way of an oncoming truck before blacking out. In the epilogue, it is deemed that Rumi has some sort of personality disorder, and the film ends with Mima confirming that she's the real deal. The horror in Perfect Blue is oriented around discomfort. The film turns the audience's position as a viewer against them, and rather than allowing the viewer to remain a passive observer, it ascribes watching active intent, at times creating a dissonance between the horror the viewer feels and the pleasure the film implies you are meant to be feeling. By examining the ways that the film mobilizes its self-awareness as an object meant to be consumed, we can understand how Perfect Blue orchestrates discomfort and makes the audience participate in practices the film presents as exploitative. The plot structure of Perfect Blue is characterized by an overarching tension between what is real, what is performance, and what we might think of as alternate reality. Rather than regulating questions of what if to the speculative, the film concretely manifests the what if in the form of alternate Mima, and puts her in competition with the what is Mima and her role as an actress. From the outset of the film, performance and the existence of alternate realities are foregrounded. This concept of multiple realities haunts the opening sequence where Mima's professional life as an idol is match cut together with her daily life. The editing of this scene simultaneously presents the movement between these two modes of living as continuous, but ultimately, this style exaggerates the contrast between Mima's identities and segments her into distinct roles. This oscillation between the performance of the idol group and Mima carrying out mundane tasks creates a hierarchy of realness. Mima as an idol feels like a performance, while Mima as a grocery shopper feels real. As the film progresses, this sense of doubleness or multiplicity intensifies. Audio in the film is used to create this sensation in two ways: the shift between diegetic and non-diegetic sound signals, and awareness of the audience as an external, additional viewer of Mima, and audio is also used to bridge together certain match cuts. This can transform dialogue into this precarious blend of both acting and real attempts at communication. In the scene where Mima receives a threatening fax message, the machine sound grows louder and louder to the point where it exceeds its role as a sound effect of printing and becomes an anxiety-ridden pattern of mechanical sounds. The overflow of this sound, from diegetic to non-diegetic, could be seen as a medium-specific gesture that acknowledges the audience as an external viewer of Mima. The music continues to intensify as the shot switches to an outsider's perspective of someone looking in through Mima's window. The composition of this shot is voyeuristic and unsettles the viewer by creating a somewhat fourth wall breaking moment where Mima is looking back at us from within the room. Observing her feels much more prying and intrusive from this angle, and there is the uncomfortable sensation that we are actually being aligned with a POV shot, calling back to Mima's unease at hearing the line, "I'm always looking at Mima's room." In this sequence, the film forces us to reckon with how we are complicit in substantiating Mima's fear of being watched. By thrusting the audience into this violating POV, the film displays the sinister nature of how Mima and her image are being voyeuristically consumed and exposes the audience's own positionality. Discomfort is generated in the audience by how this moment implies that the stalker, the online lurkers, and them as the viewer are all engaged in a similar practice, becoming an invisible and omnipresent gaze directed at Mima. In this moment, horror emerges out of our unease with, and our rejection of, how the film aligns us together with the antagonistic perpetrators in the film. When Mima attempts to project this gaze through her panic drawing of the blinds, we feel included in who she wants to shut out. Furthermore, there is a doubleness in her address, "Who are you?"
あなた誰なの? あなた誰なの?
Which speaks not only to the potential diegetic watchers, but also directly out at the audience. The "Who are you" line becomes a segue into Mima practicing her lines for double bind. This cut contrasts a moment where Mima is consenting and wanting to be looked at and filmed to the prior moment when she feels violated by the gaze. This underscores a tension in the audience's entitlement towards viewing Mima. Despite the value we may place in seeing the real Mima, the Mima in the daily life, we must reconcile with how Mima may only want to be seen when performing. As alternate Mima becomes a more prominent figure in the film, our discomfort stemming from this tension becomes further troubled as both Mima and the audience struggle to discern between what is real, what is performance, and what is presented as an alternate reality. The unease that emerges out of this destabilization of reality is scaffolded by how the film pushes its medium into the foreground. In the double bind scene, the intense use of match cuts creates an exaggerated sense of the scenes being edited and stitched together. This foregrounds the film as an amalgamation or an assemblage of parts drawn out of a database. In the sequence of the film where Mima repeatedly wakes up, the film is able to generate anxiety around the repetition or reuse of scenes that have uncanny similarity. At the start of this sequence, Mima is shown chasing after alternate Mima when she suddenly appears at a radio recording session with her old idol groupmates. Mima desperately follows her, continuing her pursuit outside of the building where she is ultimately hit by a van driven by her stalker. The flinching of her body before she gets hit cuts to her violently waking up, implying that Mima was dreaming. However, there is uncertainty about when the dream actually began. After she wakes up, Mima goes on to have tea with Rumi, as if nothing is out of the ordinary. Suddenly, a hand reaches out to pat Mima's shoulder, which does not match the audience's spatial understanding of who is in the room. This hand and the line being spoken merge together Mima's current perception of reality with a shot of her performance on the set of Double Bind. After the director calls out "Take 2, the scene of Mima violently waking up is reused. The director's call creates the uncomfortable sense that these repeated portions are alternates within the film, ones that could be interchanged, substituted, or edited together to make up the real scene of the movie. The confusion and anxiety surrounding the somewhat nonsensical ordering of both events becomes linked to how films themselves are constructed. Through this moment, Perfect Blue is able to evoke discomfort about how the film is presenting itself as a database narrative. The film perverts how elements of a database are meant to be selected and sequenced together to make meaning, instead revealing how different possible combinations and alternate realities can be constructed out of these selected elements. The film overwhelms us with the possibility that we have misunderstood, or perhaps can never definitively know, what the correct or real sequencing of elements from the database is meant to be. Mima's own anxieties over this repetition play out when she talks to Rumi for the second time. Approaching Perfect Blue as a kind of database narrative provides an angle for understanding the ways in which Mima herself has become databaseified. In the scene where the stalker is scrolling through the Mima's Room blog, we see him reading the entries, and yet it is Mima's voice that is emitted from his lips. While the stalker does not make the full transformation into becoming Mima like Rumi does, this moment serves to demonstrate how Mima's embodiment has become segmented. Different elements of her identity, such as her voice, are being separated from her, and there is an uncomfortable ventriloquism in how her identity is being adopted by other characters. This sense of segmentation reaches a peak in the scene where Rumi, presented as alternate Mima, chases after Mima in the film's climax. When her wig is ripped off, Rumi reverts back to her normal physical appearance, further destabilizing the relationship between Mima as a totality and Mima as an assemblage. At the higher level, we are also drawn into participating in this databasification of Mima by separating the Mimas presented in the film into distinct characters. As the narrative unfolds, we initially consider alternate Mima as a hallucination, but also as a separate identity. Alternate Mima becomes even more fully severed from real Mima once it is revealed that Rumi is also embodying a version of Mima. The replication of Mima's room and the multiplicity of Mimas constantly unsettles our understanding of how many different registers of her identity exist in the film. This encourages the impulse to categorize what we are seeing into a database of Mimas. The film's commentary about what is disturbing about how the audience and the characters in the world databasify Mima is conveyed through its portrayal of how this practice acts as a vehicle for commodifying Mima. Commodification operates on both the diegetic and the non-diegetic level in Perfect Blue. Within the film, Mima transforms from one type of commodity, an idol, to another, an actress. However, a consequence of spectating this transformation is the audience's own participation in consuming Mima, both her image and her story, as an entertainment object, and perhaps, as a result, as a pleasure object. Mima's commodification in the world of Perfect Blue starts off with her role as a pop idol. She is there to entertain the people via her performances with Cheng, music releases, and every other type of promotional propaganda that's expected to be done by someone in her industry. During her last performance with Cheng, a POV shot shows Mima framed and glowing in the palm of a man's hand. The following match shot shows the POV is from Uchida, further solidifying Mima's role as a commodity specifically for the male gaze. After Mima chooses to leave the idol industry to pursue becoming an actress, one of her agents, Tarokuro, pushes her to accept acting out a rape scene for the show Double Bind. The rape scene dramatizes the destruction or ruin of Mima's cute and pure idol image. During the scene, Mima is dressed in a frilly apron outfit that bears a striking resemblance to the outfit she wore on stage during the Cham show. The apron does little to cover Mima's chest, and almost immediately after the scene begins, the rapist sticks his hand under the apron to grope her. As Mima continues to scream, there is this looming terror that she is no longer acting and desperately calling for the scene to actually stop without anyone noticing. The audience's inability to discern what is performance and what is real becomes a prominent source of anxiety. However, the more insidious undercurrent of this response is the audience's knowledge that this violation of Mima's body and its symbolic violation of her idol image is entirely orchestrated. The cuts that display the film crew in the background emphasize how this commodification is systematically manufactured, and the leering faces of the crowd watching the rape imply that this is made with the knowledge that certain viewers will find it pleasurable. We are inserted into the POV perspective of these men, and the musical cues of the film impress onto the viewer this exploitative gaze. The music played during this scene intensifies the audience's discomfort. The song is an upbeat yet easy to listen to pop rock tune which strongly contrasts the disturbing visual of Mima being raped. Not only does this music not match the tone of the scene, but to play party music over such a horrifying part of the movie somewhat suggests that, similar to the viewers in the world of Perfect Blue, the real audience of the film should be enjoying its contents. This scene marks a shift in how Mima is commodified in the diegetic world and for the viewer. Rather than continuing to exploit the personal and emotional idea of Mima as a pure and innocent idol who must be protected, Mima is recast as a promiscuous and sexually available object for male desire. Fans of the idol Mima denounce this shift and seem to hold themselves morally higher than those who choose to consume her image sexually. They claim a parasocial knowing of Mima, insisting that she isn't like this or that this isn't the real Mima. Through these remarks, they re-establish her as their object, even if they do not explicitly mark her out as a sexual commodity. In the scope of a larger narrative, this also plays out through Rumi's destructive fetishization of Mima's idol image, despite her interactions with Mima initially parading as protective and supportive. When Mima is coerced into doing a nude photo shoot, her positionality as a sexual object for the audience becomes heightened further. Despite the distressing nature of the scene, Mima does not appear to be alarmed or resistant during the photo shoot, and the entire sequence takes on a pornographic, fantasy-like quality. Furthermore, the reception of Mima's nude photos, and their reemergence later on in the film, underscore the circulation of Mima as a collection of objectified body parts. The sound of the photographer's camera is blended with the shutter clicks of fan photographers who are watching Mima's ex-idol groupmates perform on stage. The shared music and match cuts throughout the scene shows the direct parallel between how women are consumed as commodities in both roles. The film uses this moment to comment on how the emotional commodification of women is just as insidious as the sexual commodification is, but is rarely understood as such. The consequences of sexually commodifying Mima for the male gaze play out through the actions later to be known committed by Rumi and the stalker. Every person who has helped contribute to the further commodification of Mima is killed, and specifically stabbed in the eyes. The first of the murders is the writer of Double Bind, Shibuya, who was seen in an elevator with his eyes gouged out. He was responsible for writing the rape scene that Mima had to participate in. His murder takes place while Angel of Love is playing, and is another instance where Perfect Blue uses upbeat music to make the viewer uncomfortable. The first time the song is played is at the lighthearted Cheng concert. The song's upbeat, happy nature creates a disturbing atmosphere when it is played, and is positioned as part of the cause of Shibuya's murder. The film's use of music complicates the viewer's emotional reaction to the scene. While we may darkly condone the murder of Shibuya for how he sexualizes Mima, the murder is also in service of another kind of commodification, the preservation of Mima as an idol. Not only are we unsettled by the uncanniness of hearing happy-go-lucky music framing this graphic murder, but we cannot ignore what the music implies about the motivation of the murderer. In this way, the film makes the viewer uncomfortable with the potential cathartic feelings we may get from seeing Shibuya punished for his actions. The next murder victim is the scandalous photographer Murano, who is responsible for coercing Mima into doing the nude photo shoot. He is murdered while watching an episode of Double Bind and is stabbed not only in the eyes, but also in the crotch, emphasizing how his murder is retribution for sexually commodifying Mima. Finally, the stalker Uchida and Mima's producer Tarokoro are both found murdered with their eyes gouged out. Tarokoro's murder can be attributed to his encouragement and suggestion that Mima should accept acting in the rape scene to further her acting career. Uchida's murder occurs after he attempts to rape and kill Mima to quote-unquote save the real her. This acts as parallel to the rape scene filmed for Double Bind and displays how the fetishization of purity can easily morph into sexual commodification. The audience's own role in consuming Mima's image and story becomes a point of self-reflective discomfort. Even after seeing the distressing effects completing these objectifying tasks have on Mima, such as when she breaks down in her room after agreeing to perform the rape scene, the audience continues to watch the film. Mima's struggle with the aftermath of appealing to the male gaze itself becomes an entertainment object for us. While at the start, the audience may not feel as if they are intentionally watching the film for the purpose of commodifying Mima. However, the film makes the audience aware of how they become complicit with commodification through their choice to continue to watch till the end. This difference between actively watching the movie and passively contributing to the male gaze creates a sense of discomfort in the viewer, now knowing that through consuming the film, they have inadvertently participated in further objectifying and commodifying Mima. The horror Perfect Blue elicits from its viewers emerges out of the uncomfortableness they feel when watching. Kon creates an atmosphere that projects assumptions onto the viewer about what they want to see and how they'll feel about it. As the film blurs the lines of reality to create a winding story about the struggle over one's identity, the film also layers on additional register of discomfort by pointing to the audience's own participation in the commodification of Mima.